Sweet. Our August 2023 Advocates Network, and today sort of is the last of three more advocacy focused meetings this summer. And this one, we're going to talk about the ballot, and specifically our public education voter program, which we have run for the last 4 years now. So if you could just follow these instructions up here on the screen real quick, go ahead and put your name, your pronouns, and what city you're zooming in from, as well as your organization or school in the chat, just so we can get to know each other a little better. You can see the example at the bottom there. That is my information. All right, just to recap our new vision, we're going to have this up here for a few more meetings at least. Through public education, every Colorado student, regardless of their zip code, learning needs, language, identities, or the color of their skin, graduates prepared to lead their best life. And then our mission, Great Education Colorado harnesses the power of grassroots activism and diverse, inclusive networks to guarantee that public schools in every Colorado community are welcoming and adequately, equitably, and sustainably funded. All right, as always, our goal for the Advocates Network meetings is to create a space for us to build community and take action together. Our next meeting is on September 12th. We have these the second Tuesday of every month, and in a little bit, I will go ahead and drop a link to the next meeting sign up in the chat. All right, community commitments. As always, move up, move back. We want everybody who wants a chance to speak to have a chance to speak. But in order for that to happen, we can't have people monopolizing the discussion. Number two here, no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Let's learn together. We all bring different experiences to this space. Teachers, some of us are lifelong advocates. Some of us are maybe in school right now, and all of us at one point or another were in school. And then last but not least, presuming pausing intent, but acknowledging our impact. If it happens that somebody says something that is offensive or hurtful or something that someone else just doesn't like, our expectation here is that we make repairs for that and then move on. All right. So the topic of our big presentation today is what it usually is this time of year, which is, what does it mean to be a public education voter? Now, to give a little bit of background on this, public education voter is something that we started in 2019 during the Prop CC campaign as a way to get people engaged and get them talking to their neighbors, their friends and family, and to sort of get that grassroots style of organizing going, and get people interested in ballot initiatives, really. So what does it mean to be a public education voter? So a public education voter, as we define it, is someone who stands up for students and teachers every election up and down the ballot. Pretty much every year, whether it's an off year or an even year, we have things on the ballot that concern public education, whether they are cuts to funding, attempts at more funding, or just sort of moving things around, playing with statute. There's always something. And so when we judge a ballot initiative, so a proposition, a constitutional measure, whatever it is, we have some guidelines that we use. So we vote yes, or recommend voting yes on measures that prevent cuts to public education now and in the future. Yes on measures that secure more funding for public education now and in the future. No on measures that make cuts to public education funding now and in the future. And no on measures that would implement unfunded mandates. All right. And this is our ballot slate. So these top two things, Proposition HH and Proposition II, are on the ballot. And Initiative 50 is something that is having signatures gathered right now. It won't be on this ballot, but it could potentially be on the next one. And so we want people to decline to sign Initiative 50. So we'll explain these more in just a moment. But first of all, we want to have, we're actually going to do this first. Proposition HH is a measure, I think, that has, a lot of people are really passionate about it. a lot of people are kind of confused about it. But we wanted to open this discussion today, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for just a moment, with just a simple question about HH, which is, what have you heard about it? What sort of rumblings are you picking up on? What are the good things, the bad things, things you have questions about? So I just want to open the discussion a little bit for probably 5, 6, 7 minutes here, so we can talk a little bit about that. If you have questions about it, if you have something you would just like to say about it, give your opinion, that's great too. But I will just go ahead and turn it over to y'all. And we'll talk about HH for a minute, and then we will get into why we are supporting it as an organization.
Folks hear anything about it?
What was that, Lisa?
Just wondering, folks that are hearing anything about it at this point.
It's a possibility that we aren't, but Duran?
Ronnie? And then
I've heard a little bit about it, and the person that's like campaigning for it at one of the Colorado PTA like big meetings or whatever. And I was a little bit confused by it because she explained things really quickly and I couldn't catch everything she was saying. I tried to take notes. And so, yeah. So I just know a little bit about it in terms of funding. It's supposed to keep public school funding consistent. And like I said, from what I understand, not take anything away, like not cut anything, but it's supposed to keep it consistent. Now, again, I could be wrong, but you know, I'm sure y'all will get me up to snuff on it. But like I said, that's what I know so far.
Yeah, that's a pretty good assessment of it, I think. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Representative Kipp.
I have been, well, I obviously voted to put it onto the ballot, but I know there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of concern, frankly, that I'm hearing about from local governments, which is one reason I wanted to show up today and sort of hear out how you all are talking about it. I know that it's going to be important for people like me to be doing more communication and education within our communities, but I will have to say, I personally believe it's a good thing, but I also do believe that there's enough confusion around it that I am a little bit nervous about the things I'm hearing. Local governments are afraid that they're not going to receive backfills or adequate backfills. And I think that's scary when it comes to, you know, pitting people who tend to be like-minded against each other. But anyway, I still think it's a good thing. I just think that it's important that we make it clear and get our communications out in a good way.
Great. And I might, after we sort of explain our take on it, I might come back to you and ask you what you think we can do to make it clear, or, you know, in your telling. But any others?
I'll just say that what Michael feels the loudest voices so far have been on the right and their holiday bomb Caldera, Conget, and run around Tabor, which is an effective message, it sounds like, but not true. We're just asking voters on tax policy, and that's pretty much what they says we have to do. But that's, there have been columns about it, the papers written about it, the posts, or people who actually do newspapers. So.
Hey, Lisa, you're breaking up quite a bit.
Okay.
I was just saying that the voices that, yeah, I won't be able to hear you very well, but this is better. The most that a lot of people have heard about it has been coming from the right, saying that it's an end run around Tabor, which it isn't. It's just a tax policy question that's being put in front of the voters, and that's what Tabor says we have to do. So,
Yep.
Paul?
All right. So all of that said, those were great things. Let's go ahead and dive into why we are supporting this as an organization and why it made our public education voter slate this year. All right. So why are we saying yes on Prop HH? So two big reasons, and then I'll hand it over to Lisa to talk more about some smaller details, and we can do questions as we go along this time, because doing them at the end might be not so good if we've just talked about a bunch of different policies. So why HH? So it provides needed property tax relief that won't hurt our schools and public services. And under certain circumstances, it could raise enough money to more than just offset those cuts in property taxes. So that's, you can think of that as a down payment on the BS factor debt that we owe Colorado students. So those are our two big reasons. Obviously, we are not claiming that this is some panacea. This is not, getting us all of the money we need, but it is something that could help us out, both in the short term and also in the long term. Lisa, what else, I guess, is important about Proposition HH to us?
Well, I think it is incredibly complicated. There are so many parts to it, but we really want to bring it down to this simple idea that the assessment values that people have been receiving, the statements that they've gotten are eye-popping. 30, 40, 80% increases from their 2021. And so we know that there is hardship for a lot of folks, lower income people who have a lot of equity, but not a lot of ability to pay taxes. So there's that. And so there is a need to address this. The second reason that there's a need to address it now is this concern about, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, Initiative 50, which is, as Ben said, there is an effort to put that on the ballot for 2024. It's Michael Fields, it's John Caldera, it's the anti-tax, anti-public service folks. And it's far more, it's a machete to our schools as opposed to this being, or a machete, and really a hatchet to so many cutting utensils, but a hatchet to the property revenues. And it's an irresponsible way to cut taxes. So there is this sense, part of the reason that this was put on the ballot was to provide some responsible property tax relief. So there's the substantive reason that some people really do need that relief. And then there's the policy reason of trying to not have something much, much worse like taxpayer revolt happen next year. It does, there are a lot of other components, and I'm going to hand it over to Representative Kipp and to just sort of say what made her support it. But the big change, the reason that it doesn't hurt schools is because we are changing the Tabor surplus limit. We're going to increase it by an extra 1% every year for 10 years. And that could, it will have the impact of backfilling the loss of property taxes that come from the cuts that we're voting for. And it may at some point, as our second bullet says, actually bring in more than what is being lost from the property tax cut. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. Over time, this allows us to keep some more of the surplus, which is a measure of how well our economy is doing, and allow us to start getting back some of what we lost. Not all of it. And what's really critical is that this not be sold as we're fixing schools. This is that over time, we may be able to pay back a little bit, but we are heading off that property tax, the property tax revolt, or at least that's the goal. There are a lot of other things about how it changes assessment rates, that there's some renters support, that if it passes, the Tabor surplus will actually be given back to folks in an equal amounts instead of the wealthy getting more. So overall, it's going to save people money. And we're going to have this long-term benefit of changing the Tabor limit, which has been, over the last several years, we've given back $8 billion that could have been paying teachers. So we also, Representative Kipp, we also have Representative Hamrick here. I want, since you guys did put this in front of us, give you the chance to give your views as well.
I'm sorry, I'm in a very bright place, can hardly see if I'm unmuted or not, but I'll just go. I think that the reason I'm supporting this is because I think it's really important for people to think about it this way. In 2022, our voters voted to reduce our income taxes, right? And if this passes, people are going to get a larger one-time rebate than they did last year for a tax bill. That was $750 last year. They're looking at $800 this year. So how is it that we're bringing in less income and we're giving back more of our money to people? The formula isn't working. So we needed to do something to adjust the formula so that we can pay for these things that we all really value, like our schools and our roads. And at the same time, the property tax values, I think they were, the assessment values were an average of 38% increased last year. They were done in June of 2022, which was at the peak of property values. So people are really wanting to have some relief from that. One other, I think, selling point that you can use when you're talking to folks about it is the portability of the senior homestead exemption, right? One of the things we're trying to do is to open up more housing, because we have a housing crisis as well, for people. And if we give people the ability to move and bring their tax exemption with them when they're seniors, from a larger place to a smaller place to downsize, we can also free up housing stock. There's actually a lot of good things like that in this measure. But most importantly, I think making sure that we have adequate income in order to fund the things in our state that we need to fund are why I voted to put this on the ballot. And feel free, Rep. Hamrick, to go.
Hi, thanks, Rep. Kipp. Yeah, I agree with everything you brought up. You are someone I turn to often for budget questions and things like that. So, yeah, and then we had an HH briefing today for some of us that had lots of questions about it. And yeah, it's basically, yeah, reduces property taxes, backfills municipalities and special districts and things like that, and will increase the Tabor cap by 1%, which will help, bring in more money for the legislature, but also will bring in a lot more money for the, what is it? The education fund. Sorry, I just got my car. And so that's going to help with education funding. And I'm very excited about that. So just for education alone, it's going to really help fund our schools and really help local communities with their resources for their schools.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and we can do about 5 minutes of question and answer right now, and then we will move on to our next point, which is Prop II. So questions, comments?
This is Sean. I have a question regarding HH. Do we expect a huge amount of opposition to HH?
It's already happening.
It's already happening?
The first things that they're talking to their base, this is the folks who really want to continue to enshrine Tabor. So there is a lawsuit against it that is pending right now to say that it's not a single subject and that it's misleading to voters. So they've already done the legal challenge. There is some pretty consistent messaging coming from the Independence Institute and from Rising Colorado. Is that the Michael Fields? So they have an issue committee that as of August 1st had no money in it, called No on HH, but they're ready.
Could I just chime in on that too? Because I'm really hearing a lot from local government types on this who are very, very nervous about the amount of backfill they're going to get. And I'm, more worried about like us eating our own. And I'm sorry, I didn't see somebody else who had their hand up, but I just want to add that to that response.
No. Kathy, go ahead, please.
That was all I had to say. I'm worried. I've been hearing from my county. I've heard from nearby municipalities, local library district. I've just heard from a number of them who are very nervous, and I want to make sure that we can answer their questions and make sure that everybody is on the same page, because we can't, if we're going to do infighting, we're never going to get a pass.
Thank you. Christy, and then Representative Hamrick.
Well, two things to Sean's point. I've already received, and it was in June, I think was the first one, multiple mailers about HH taking away your Tabor refunds. But then my question is, and it's a concern, and that is that we don't have a strong campaign hitting the ground. I feel like we're so far behind in such a complicated measure that I don't know. I just think we're behind the 8 ball already.
Thanks, Christy. Representative Hamrick.
And there may be another ballot measure. We're not sure. There's people collecting signatures and we're hearing a 3% reduction, 4% reduction. There might be two different ones. It might be on this ballot or it might be in 2024, but that's sort of floating out there too. We're doing research on who they are and when it will be on the ballot. So kind of a counter one.
Yep, we're going to talk about one of them in just a few minutes. Other questions? All right, we will go ahead and move on to our next one then. Proposition II. So Prop II is a lot more straightforward, easy to grasp than Prop HH. So we have a universal pre-K program. So right now, the reality is that UPK is very underfunded. And it needs money, and it's hard to get money for that. But a few years ago in 2020, voters approved a measure called Proposition EE. What Proposition EE did is it raised taxes on nicotine products and vaping products. And it took a portion of that money and directed it to that preschool program. The problem is that we can't access a lot of that, or we can't access some of the money we need right now. And so what I would do is simply ask voters to say, can we lift the cap on that money? So it's $23 or $24 million and direct it towards universal pre-K. One of the nice things about this is it doesn't raise taxes. but we're still directing revenue to a place we need it. And then it also works with existing fiscal infrastructure. So Prop EE is something that has already been in place. It has already generated that revenue. And we are asking the voters if they'll just say, well, can the state have access to that for UPK? And so it's pretty straightforward. That's pretty much all it does. There aren't, I mean, it's not like we were just talking about with HH, it's multi-part. It does a lot of different things. This just does one thing. It is not a cure-all. UPK still needs a lot more money, but it's a start. Because it directs funding for a place of need in education, we are supporting it.
I would just add this question. Can anyone say what's the culprit that makes us have to vote on something that we already voted on in 2020?
Tabor.
Tabor, yeah, this is, and you may remember this with Proposition AA way back when, 2013 maybe. I can't remember what year. We taxed marijuana, and then 2 years later we had to vote for something like this because the measure said, shall taxes be raised by X? And that's what we voted for, but the tax actually raised X plus $24 million in this case. And so because it's above what it said in the ballot, we have to vote again. So thank you, Doug Bruce.
For someone who doesn't want state government, it's shocking how much they want us to spend to.
That's our private money though. They have no qualms with that. Jay?
What is the primary argument against Prop II? Like, if you're not for it, what are you telling your friends, family, colleagues why they shouldn't vote for it?
The usual, that taxes are bad and that the state should live within its means. And I don't think there's going to be a big campaign against this, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a pretty big campaign being put together to make sure that it does pass. But it's $23.5 million is not that much, and it's not a rebate that would go to the voters. Like the big surplus goes to taxpayers. This would pretty much force a reduction in the nicotine and cigarette tobacco taxes. And so it would go back to the retailers and the wholesalers and to the people. I don't know if it even would go back to the people who smoke. I guess it would if the tax goes down. So it's not a broad-based refund that's coming back. So I don't think there's going to be the same kind of opposition.
And I would say, if anything, like when we worked on Prop CC in 2019, we were trying to lift the cap a little bit to get a little bit more money for education and transportation. And so, I mean, it's a pretty similar, I think, and the arguments for that were sort of what Lisa just touched on was, well, they're raising taxes. It's like, no, they're not. They're not raising taxes. We're talking about, lifting the cap to get this much more money out so that we can put it to services that are in dire need of more funding. So that would probably be the main thing, but like, I think the opposition to HH is going to be a lot more strenuous than opposition to II will be, just because it's not dealing with refunds, and it's harder to attack, and it's also not a very big amount of money.
And if I can just say, I agree with that. HH is going to be a harder thing, but right off, I did hear some argumentation against II saying, well, the state already said that this was how much universal preschool was going to cost. They already asked for that amount of money. So if there's more money, it should just go back to the voters. So there's this idea that if there's more money, that it's actually extra money, and that's a surplus. And we really, I think, need to combat that terminology, frankly, right? Because just because there's more money than you thought doesn't mean that there's necessarily enough for what you were trying to pay for, if that makes sense.
All right. Jay.
Just two follow-ups, unfortunately, about HH, because I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand when you're asking questions then. One, to the point of infighting, what are the primary concerns around local governments, library communities? I think that was the phrase that was used. Like, what is the infighting about? If there is property tax relief, then there won't be as much property tax going to fund these local communities. Is that the basic gist?
This is the concern is this. You've got Denver and Boulder where the increases are 20–40%. And so reducing the assessment rate, the percent of the value of property that's even taxed, by reducing that, cities like Denver and Boulder are still, with the tax cut as it is now, they're still going to be bringing in more than they did before those assessments, that the values went up so much in 21, 22, right? But if you're in, I don't know, Yuma or other parts of the state where those property values didn't go up, this property tax cut, the reduction in the assessment rate goes all across the state. And so in those districts where they didn't see the run up of values, they're actually getting cuts. They are actually going to experience less property tax coming in. And so
it's not proportional.
What's that?
It's not proportional.
It's not proportional. It's not even around the state. We've got this one rule across the state when everybody is having such a different experience. Parts of the economy did better than others. And so there's money that's set aside to backfill those districts where they didn't experience those run-ups of value. And Representative Kipp, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that they're concerned that backfill is not going to be enough. It's separate from the backfill for the state education fund. That's just taking some of the surplus and it goes into the state education fund after it's sort of, the first thing is backfilling the fire districts and the cities and counties that we're talking about where they didn't have a run up in values. And then all the money that we get to keep because of this change in the Tabor surplus limit goes into the state education fund. Because the state backfills anyway, the first, schools are the only place where there's property tax comes in first, and then the state figures out how much on top of that they need to give. In these others, there's no such backfill ordinarily for these other districts. So I think they're afraid that they're not going to get back what they need to maintain services.
Right, and even in larger districts, I think it's the top 20%, or is it, well, maybe the top 20% get backfilled. I need to go recheck that. But anyways, not everybody gets backfilled. So counties the size of mine are not going to get backfilled. And they're like, well, and there was a city in my county that was having the same issue, which I think they might be small enough that they will get backfilled. But the issue is that, well, if you're not going to get backfilled, we're not going to get the amount of taxes we were thinking we were going to get. And I still would challenge that, because if you, first of all, if we have one of these tighter things passed, that's going to not have any backfill associated with it, everybody's going to be worse off. And secondly, the run-ups in the values have been so great that giving a little bit of property tax relief to people should be helpful, and then helping us backfill with additional Tabor money, which again, we're getting more and more Tabor money over the Tabor cap and returning more to voters. When we have less coming in, it makes no sense the way it's working. We need to make sure that we're letting people know that. And I just don't want to get crosswise with all of our local governments and say, well, we could lose some money if this happens. Well, yeah, but I think overall everybody's going to be better off. And the question is, what's more, how much your property taxes would have been versus how the relief that you're giving to people. And don't forget, we also passed something this year that says local governments can give tax relief to people on a temporary basis. So it's likely to happen regardless, because people are pretty mad about their property values going up so much. Not that that's anybody's fault, but they have gone up a lot.
Mhm. Got it.
Thank you, Rip.
Complicated.
Yeah.
Sorry, one last one.
Yeah,
You
and then
talked about,
we're gonna move on to some more stuff.
oh yeah, sure.
You can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is anyone aware of any organized effort to drive awareness around HH to get people motivated to vote yes for it?
There is a campaign that's getting started. They are in the
Right.
raising money stage. And as you'll hear later, Great Ed is working to find a way to and hopefully the funding to really go get the word out that public education is on the ballot and that people have to vote in this off-year election. So what exactly the campaign is going to look like, I don't know. I don't know if anybody else on the call has more information about it, but it's coming. The campaign is coming.
Great, thanks.
I believe it's cut property taxes now, I think is the name of the campaign committee for it. And if they don't have the website up yet, which was probably going to be yesonhh.com, it will be up soon.
Yep. All right. Any more questions on II before we move on to the last part of our public education voter slate? Great. All right. This one's fun to say. Don't sign Initiative 50. All right, Lisa, I will hand this over to you.
So as I said, there is this sense that we needed, one of the reasons that HH was put on the ballot was to avoid a full taxpayer revolt like what happened with Proposition 13 in California. More than 40 years ago, which crippled California. It's a limitation on how much anybody's property tax bill can go up in a year. So you could have, during this run up, you could, the value of your home could have gone up 80%. And if Initiative 50 gets its way, the tax will only go up by as much as 4% every year. And what it means is people stay in their houses because their tax rates are so low. When you buy a new house, you're up at a much higher rate. So in California, this decimated the higher education system, which was once the envy of the country and the world, and free for residents. So that's the kind of thing that's coming. This is the cleaver to tax property revenues that we're talking about. The weird thing about it is that if statewide the value of property goes up by more than 4%, or the tax bill for the state goes up by more than 4%, the entire state has to vote on whether a municipality or whatever local government can keep it. So for instance, once again, we've got parts of the state where it's the value of property goes up by 10, 15%. And so that means that maybe statewide, you got an 8, 9, 10% increase in the total amount of property tax, the bills that are being paid. And suddenly people in Fort Collins are voting on whether Denver can keep more funding, and people in, Buena Vista are voting on Grand Junction, because it's a statewide vote that affects every locality, and it is aimed at cutting property taxes and reducing public investments. So to contrast with HH, which is a responsible way to give needed property tax relief without hurting schools, 50 is a wholly irresponsible, massive tax cut that will devastate not just K-12, but all local services across the state.
Not something we want, obviously.
So we'll have some decline to sign and social media and things like that. And we've decided to put this in our, well, we have to have a final decision by our board now that I think about it, with Christy and Mimi on board. But including it as something else to both show the difference and why HH is good and that's bad, but also to just raise consciousness about this, this effort to give something that's just too good to be true.
Yep. And the good thing about this is that we do have a little bit of time. Obviously, so getting people not to sign is very important. So we'll have by the Friday email, if not the full thing, something that you can act on this, because this is something, I mean, the scary thing about initiatives like this is that they largely happen in quiet. And that's sort of what's happening right now. If you Google initiative Colorado right now, you don't get anything. You get something that was proposed, 20 years ago, and it didn't work, and now this bears its name. So that's the sketchy thing about these. But we have our finger on the pulse early, and so we'll do our best to get something out to y'all as soon as possible. Christy.
So this, for some reason, I was thinking what they were looking at was an amendment. But this is an initiative, so it's statutory, correct?
I have to look at it to see if it needs to change the Constitution. It may be constitutional, but they can do that with, they just have to gather signatures all around the state, and they would have to win with 55. I looked at this. I don't remember if it's constitutional or not, but I'm not certain enough to say, but
In my head, I remember it being constitutional and that being at least a little bit helpful, since they have to get signatures all across the state. But they've got such deep pockets. What are the chances of us preventing it from getting on the ballot?
If they want it on the ballot, it will get on the ballot. They have national funders who want us on our heels all the time. So I think it's important to use the energy that they're putting into it to raise this conversation about, you know what, the public services that make our communities thrive is what we pay for with property taxes. And this just gives us an opportunity to remind people of that and not let that education opportunity be wasted.
Yeah, and the other another goal of a decline to sign campaign is obviously building momentum for opposition when a campaign does happen, so that you're not trying to cobble something together last minute. And we've seen it work in the past, and it's so these things, it's not just that we're not trying to get it on the ballot, because like Lisa said, like if Michael Fields and Americans for Prosperity and whoever else deep-pocketed Republicans want it on the ballot, like it will be on the ballot. But it's on us to get people to be aware of it, and its harmful effects and the harmful effects that it could have on the state, so that we have some momentum and good opposition going into an election if it is on the ballot. Other questions, comments, concerns?
Does anybody know how the governor feels about this one?
I don't know specifically, but I do know that he was pushing Proposition HH because he was trying to head off something like this. I think he really does not want this to happen.
Yeah, because the only comment I've heard, and it wasn't directly related to HH, but I think it was meant, I mean, I didn't mention it, but it was the governor's, wants our Tabor money. And I said, no, he's not a real fan of Tabor, but maybe that's, yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Paul. There is a typo on the slide. Unless we,
Teacher in the room.
unless we figured out how to, it's a new way to actually spell retention, but it's not. Others? And as more information about this comes out, guaranteed we will be talking about it here again. Because this is something that could really decimate a lot of public services. This is sort of the very beginning of it. And you know, always a chance that they don't want it on the ballot. They're just sort of doing this at the beginning. But because that has happened before. But we always want to prepare ourselves for the real thing. All right. So that is the end of our formal programming today. However, next time we're going to do part 2 of public education voter, and it's going to be school boards, which are great fun. And there's a lot going on right now, obviously. So I'm going to let Lisa talk about this for a couple minutes and give you a little primer.
So we, as Ben showed at the beginning, our mission is about making sure that there are welcoming and adequately, equitably, and sustainably funded schools, public schools in every community. And that welcoming part is particularly important right now. We know that there were about 10 districts taken over, maybe more. I don't know that we know all of them, by people who are not interested in creating welcoming environments for schools, or at least not for all students, regardless of their identities and the language spoken at home and the color of their skin. So we do not endorse candidates. Great Ed cannot endorse candidates. We're a C3. That's not our work. But what we do need to do is make sure, when we say this is what it means to be a public education voter, and when we tell people public education is on the ballot in 2023, it's not an even numbered year, but it's an incredibly important year. And so what we can do is encourage people to be asking their school board candidates important questions like, what is your plan to make sure that there's adequate funding for our schools at the state and local level? What are you going to do? What is your plan to make sure that all students, regardless of their identities and their socioeconomic status and the color of their skin and the language they speak, what are you do? What is your plan to make sure that those schools are welcoming? We will be working on, like I said, our hope is to be able to be through our issue committee, to be working on Proposition HH and Proposition II and texting people and letting them know that it's important for them to get out and vote. But just as importantly, we are going to be getting public education voters out to the polls. It is so critical this year. Many of you will remember back in 2013, Amendment 66 was on the ballot. That was a tax increase. And it brought out the anti-tax folks who don't usually vote in off-year elections. And that's when Jeffco turned. That's when Jeffco was taken over by including the board president, who is now the superintendent of Woodland Park, which was taken over in 2021. There are others that have been taken over. We have somebody on board today who ran in 2021 to create welcoming and equitable schools, and District 49, which is Falcon, was taken over as well. So about 10 have been taken over. There are about 40 on the list where it looks like there are folks from Moms for Liberty and other organizations like that putting up candidates. We don't know who all the candidates are. I think people could pick up their petitions today, and they have to get them in about 3 weeks. But this is absolutely critical. We have to turn out the vote. We have to convey the urgency of this. If you have not seen what happened in Woodland Park, it is horrifying. It's what happened in Douglas. It's that the superintendent gets fired, the equity policy gets tossed, and in the case of Woodland Park, they have adopted the American Birthright Standards, which was rejected twice by the State Board of Education. So that is our plea here. And I think we'll be asking, well, this is relevant to our summit that we're going to be having on September 14th, and to our volunteer. We have a volunteer form that you can fill out telling us that you would be willing to help text people and remind them, if you're a public education voter, you need to get out and vote. Not endorsing candidates, but getting public education voters out, because the other side is doing it. They are recruiting candidates, they are funding and coordinating, and we've got to do it too. Again, we do not endorse candidates. I want to make sure I say that number of times because we don't. Ben just put the September, oh, that's the September Zoom meeting. That's Advocates Network. He's also going to put in a link to the summit, to sign up for the summit, which we would love to have folks come to. There is a cost to it, but if people are not have any reason to not be, for that to be a hardship to pay, we will give scholarships, no questions asked. We have a lot of great organizations on board here today. We've got PTA, I see. We've got, I think, Boulder retired teachers. We've got the ARC of Arapahoe and Douglas. We would love to have your participation in this, your perspective brought to the table. And there'll be a whole lot of networking so that people can learn how to, not just in the next 2.5 months, but in the coming years, really gain skills, learn from each other, mentor each other, get messaging, which is something we'll be talking about at the summit, about when they say this is woke, you say this. So that for the long haul, we are creating the movement for public education that the state needs to get to that North Star of every student, no matter where they live, how they learn, color of their skin, language spoken at home, identities, can graduate ready to lead their best life. Ronnie?
You mentioned something about woke what?
I was just saying that was just an example of the folks that have taken over Woodland Park are, you know, from the Ron DeSantis School of Language. And so they are trying to get people to oppose things because it's indoctrination. And it's, you know, this thing woke that they can't even define, but they're trying to make a negative thing. Or, you know, talking about transgender athletes and dividing and, you know, not wanting to have any discussion of slavery and or the continuing impacts. They have all kinds of ways of talking about it. They talk about parent choice. And that's the kind of thing that when they come up with their language, we're working with some national organizations that have done polling to say, these are the best ways to counter that. Don't go on their turf. Talk about it differently. And that's why we're talking about the Every Student Welcome Network, which is, you know, welcoming which students shouldn't feel welcome at our schools.
Sorry about that. Okay.
No,
Everybody wants to come in here now with me when nobody wants to be in the same room as me. Anyway.
Well, those kids are the reason we're here.
Well, I understand that. I have two that are in college and one that's in middle school, and our youngest has special needs. So things like this are critically important to, you know, our family. And especially as we talk about making sure that our children are in welcoming environments, because, you know, some of the stuff that we're dealing with in Denver public schools. And what's interesting is the school in particular is the school that my daughter goes to. And it's really more than heartbreaking, it's criminal, you know, that something to this degree would be allowed to go on. And When, and it's interesting what Lisa talked about, because it's like, when it's in your face, that this is what it is, and people still try to deny it, that's really frustrating to me. Because, you know, sometimes you have to call a thing a thing. And when you know, recognize and acknowledge a thing, then you can reconcile it. But until you do those things, we're all still caught in the space of, you know, being at odds, like a us versus them all the time, which helps no one. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ronnie. Ben, if you can put that last link to the volunteer, if you want to help us get the message out that people need to vote.
Yeah, so just 1 second. I just wanted to check with Max to see if they are all right, in a good place with us releasing that, because they made the document. So, and it has not been. So.
Yes, I am comfortable with that. I was actually just about to add it to our newsletter.
Excellent.
Thanks
All
for
right.
checking.
And you all can pressure test it for us. Make sure so get in, sign up now, and let us know if retention is spelled with an extra T. I don't think that word is in there, but.
And texting is awfully easy to do. And non-confrontational, if you worry about anything like that.